Is Jeffrey Olson, and I'm here to share my near-death experience. I'm a pretty simple guy. Gosh, I grew up on a family farm. I was working in the agency business. My wife was a high school teacher, and we had these two beautiful boys. And we had actually gone on vacation. We had gone away for the Easter weekend. We lived in the northern mountains of Utah, and we'd taken a road trip to the southern part of Utah with all the red rocks and arches and all the beautiful things that you can see in a short distance in the state of Utah. And we actually had gone to southern Utah to visit my wife's folks, her family, her mom and dad, and her grandma and grandpa. And we'd had a wonderful visit, and we had celebrated the Easter weekend, and Monday rolled around, and it was time to go back to work. And we had about a 4.5, 5 hour drive ahead of us. And so we had breakfast, we hugged everyone, and I knew I was going to miss half the day of work, if not the whole day. But we had said our goodbyes, we'd hugged everybody. I'd put the kids in their car seats in the back seat, and Tamara and I had jumped in, and we were just pulling away from the curb. And there was Grandma and Grandpa, her parents, waving, on the front porch like they do. And as I began to pull away, Tamara said, "Wait, stop." And I thought she had forgotten something. And I stopped the car, and she looked at me, and she said, "I just want to say goodbye to Mom and Dad one more time." And in that moment, I thought, gosh, women, I mean, we've loaded the car, we've got to get on our way. But I noticed as she jumped out of the car and she ran up to her mom and dad and she hugged them both. And she not only hugged them, but I noticed that she kissed them. She kissed both her mom and dad, and then joyfully came and jumped in the car and buckled up, and away we went. Now, I share that for this specific reason. Somewhere she had a whisper. Somewhere she just had that, "Wait, stop, I got to go hug mom and dad one more time." And I bring that up because I think we all get those. I've learned over the years to become very conscious of that. When you get that little hit, that little whisper, "Hey, I've just got to go do this." I'm so grateful that Tamara did that, that she said, "Stop, wait, I've got to go say goodbye to mom and dad." Because as the day played out, that was the last goodbye. She jumped in the car, and I hit the interstate, and I cranked the cruise control up to 75 miles an hour, which was as fast as I could legally go. And I was hustling to get back to work, get back to the office, get back to our lives after this break, and, all that chitter chatter that goes on in your head. As I was racing up the freeway and thinking about all those things, I happened to just look in the rearview mirror. And as I glanced in the rearview mirror, my youngest son, Griffin, he caught my eye, and I noticed he was sound asleep in his car seat. And even in that glance, it's almost like time stood still. I was overcome with, wow, there he is. A miracle. We were told we may never have more children, and there he is. And I noticed details. I noticed how his hands were laid on the car seat, tray, and I noticed how long his eyelashes were. In a moment, just in that glance, I saw that, and I felt him, and then I heard the laughter and playing. My 7-year-old son, my oldest, was playing with action figures in the back seat behind me and making all the joyful noise of a little boy. And I just thought, wow, how did we get so lucky? At the same time, I just glanced at Tamara, my wife, who had also reclined her seat back, and she was sound asleep, but she was still holding onto my hand. And I thought, wow, we're 10 years into a marriage, and she's still holding my hand. I became aware of that. But it was this absolute moment of gratitude, this surreal glance in the rearview mirror and seeing what I was surrounded by and being extremely grateful. And it was about an hour after that it all came apart. I think one of the most difficult things about telling this story is I believe I may have dozed off at the wheel. I might have just nodded off briefly like that, and at any rate, I swerved to the right, I overcorrected to the left, and I lost control of the vehicle, and it flipped and began to roll, not off the road, but down the road. And it was a horrific automobile accident. They say the car rolled at least 6 to 8 times. I blacked out for most of that. But as the car came to a stop, I was completely conscious. And the first thing I heard was my 7-year-old, my oldest son, crying hysterically in the back seat. And my thought was, I've got to get to my boy. I've got to get to my son. And that's when I realized that I could not move. I was pinned either to the floorboard or the seat. I couldn't tell. There was the rancid, smell of gasoline, all the broken glass. I was unaware of my injuries. Actually, both of my legs had been crushed and shattered. My left leg was eventually amputated above the knee. My back had been broken in 2 places. My right arm had almost been torn completely off. The seatbelt had cut through me and ruptured all my insides. My rib cage had been damaged and my lungs were collapsing. I found it hard to breathe. I was losing consciousness. I was aware of the pain, but the adrenaline was like, got to get to my boy. I can hear my son. He's crying. And yet that's when the reality hit, the horrible reality that no one else was crying. And I became aware at the scene of the accident that both Tamara, my wife, and Griffin, my youngest son, were gone. They were killed instantly in the crash. That's the darkest hell a man could ever be in. Here I was pinned, unable to move, losing consciousness. I had a hysterical 7-year-old that I could not get to. Half the family's gone, and I'm aware of that, and I was driving the car. The guilt, the regret that I wanted those 3 seconds back. What happened? What happened? It felt like this has got to be a nightmare, but it was not. And what happened is in that chaotic darkness, suddenly light came. And when I say that, it felt as if light came to me. It felt as if light came and surrounded me and literally was comforting me in this horrific situation. And then suddenly I could breathe. And it felt as if I was rising above the accident scene. And I kept thinking, how can I be okay? Because it felt like, wow, I'm okay. I can breathe. The pain is gone. I'm very conscious, super conscious. I believe what was happening is my soul had left my body, but here I was in this light, wondering how can I possibly be okay? And then Tamara, my wife, who I knew she was deceased at the scene. Suddenly she was in this light with me, right there, right with me. And there was no injuries or trauma. She was gorgeous. She was radiant, and she was communicating to me. She kept saying, Jeff, you can't be here. You can't be here. You got to go back. You got to go back. You can't come. You've got to go back. And she was emotional and emphatic about it. And I was still kind of searching for my bearings here, like what's going on. But we literally had a conversation. We had a conversation about if I stayed with her, our son would be orphaned. And we literally made the choice that I was coming back. And we have no idea how powerful our thoughts are, as we made that choice. And I said the most profound goodbye I'll ever say. I didn't have to figure out how to come back. It was in making the choice. Our thoughts are so powerful. Suddenly, in saying that goodbye and choosing on going back, I found myself wandering around a hospital. When I say wandering around, moving about freely. Now, here's the interesting thing. I have no concept of time in this light, if you will. I later found out that other drivers stopped at the scene. Spencer, my 7-year-old, was banged up pretty good, but he physically walked away from the accident. I mean, he was banged up physically, but he was okay. I think he bruised his ribs and he'd cracked his wrist. But emotionally, he thought the whole family was gone. I had to be extricated from the car, and because of my injuries, I was airlifted or life flighted to the nearest level 1 trauma center. I knew none of that. All I knew is that I'd crashed the car. We'd lost half the family, and here I was moving freely about the hospital. And as I moved about, I encountered the nurses and the doctors and the other patients and the families of the patients, everything in a hustling, bustling level 1 trauma emergency setting. It's difficult to know the words to use. As I encountered them, I knew them perfectly. Even if they were strangers perhaps in this realm, but everyone I saw, I knew them perfectly. I knew their love. I knew their hate. I knew their motivations. I knew their challenges. I knew their thoughts. I knew their decisions and choices. I knew them as well as I knew myself. I now call it a oneness. There was an undeniable connection. That this was true of everyone I encountered. I knew them perfectly, and yet it was all connected in this absolute unconditional love. Love without conditions. Everyone I saw, I loved them. And then I suddenly came up to a body that I didn't feel anything from, which I thought was strange given this experience. And so I stepped closer to look, and that's when I realized, oh my goodness, that's me. There was the flesh, there was the body that I was going to have to get back into, and that I had lived my life up until that point within. And yet I also knew I had to get back in that body, in its brokenness. And again, our thoughts are so powerful. I didn't have to figure out how. just the choice, the intention. I'm going into the body. Boom, then I was back in the body, but back to the grief and the pain and the regret and the guilt and the trauma. It was so heavy. Now, there's a key part of the near death experience that I want to share because this is unique to perhaps my experience, and that is when I was life flighted into the level 1 trauma center. One of the doctors, actually Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll, he's written about this and has spoken about it publicly. He and one of the nurses had a profound experience as well. While I was out of the body, while I was having this near-death experience, they had an experience where they came into the operating room, the emergency, trauma center where I had been airlifted into. And they both reported that they saw and experienced my wife, Tamara, who was killed at the scene. They experienced her soul, her spirit, in the operating room. Dr. Jeff O'Driscoll shares that he came in and she was standing in the air above my gurney, and she communicated with him. When I asked him, "What did she communicate to you?" he shared with me, "She simply thanked us. She simply shared her gratitude for all we were doing to save your life." And when he said that, I thought, of course she did. That's exactly how she was. But I also realized he didn't know that we'd had this conversation, that we'd made this deal, that I had agreed to come back and I was going to raise our surviving son. But there was interesting things in the hospital, including that little, their body wasn't shutting down and their brain wasn't lacking oxygen. They were alive and well and healthy in the operating room, and experienced my wife's soul as they worked on me and as I was making the choice to go back into the body. I suppose in saying goodbye to my wife, Tamara, they were saying hello. They were introduced, and she communicated how grateful she was for them saving my life. That's an interesting side note. But the months in the hospital were profound. There was times that it was so painful, I felt like I would leave the body again. Like I would just have to take a break and stand over in the corner of the room and look at my broken self, just getting a breather and getting up the nerve to get back in the body and keep going. But it was at that moment, at that point, that I had another profound out-of-body or near-death experience. And it was one night when I finally laid on my side and I fell into a deep, peaceful sleep. And it's like I was aware that I was in a deep, peaceful sleep. I was sleeping and thinking, wow, I haven't slept peacefully for months. It's been so traumatic and the grief was so heavy. But on this particular night, as I slept, I felt that light come again. But this time the light dispensed and I was in the most beautiful place. People can say heaven or the spirit world or the other side. The only word that comes close to what I was experiencing is I was home. I was home. It was so familiar. It was so welcoming. I was home and I began to run. Now, I don't run in this realm, but there I had 2 feet and 2 legs and I began to run. And it was such a physical experience. It was so physical. Here I was out of the body, but I could literally feel the energy of the ground beneath my feet. It was an invigorating physical experience. I was running and I was laughing gleefully, thinking I'm home. And that's when the knowing came that you're not here to stay. I knew I wasn't there to stay. And at that same time, there was this corridor off to the left, and I knew intuitively I'm to go that way. I'm to go down that way. And I did. I began working my way down this corridor. But as I did, I looked at the end of the corridor. There was an end, and at the end was a crib. Now, Griffin, my son, had been sleeping in a crib at the time of the accident. He was only 14 months old. He was just a toddler. And so I raced to this crib, and I looked in the crib. And when I did, there he was. There was my little boy, and he was sleeping as beautifully and as peacefully as when I glanced in that rearview mirror. That's why I bring this up. I looked at him laying there, and the same emotions came up. He's a miracle. I noticed the details. I noticed how long his eyelashes were, and I picked him up and held him against me, and he was solid against me, and I could feel him breathing. I could feel his breath on my neck. I began to weep just holding him and smelling his hair and kissing his face. And as I did that, I felt this presence come up behind me, this overwhelming, powerful, cosmic presence. And then I began to have that guilt bubble up again, all that regret. I was holding him, and given my upbringing, I was feeling like, wow, that presence is God. And I'm in so much trouble. My little boy's here because I crashed the car. His life was cut short because I dozed off and I lost control, and all that guilt was coming up as I held him, weeping now with this presence coming closer and closer and closer. And I had the thought, I hope there's some way I can be forgiven. And as I had that thought, this presence had come so close, and this almost felt physical, that I just felt these divine arms just wrap around and hold me and my little boy. And I just began to weep. And with that thought, I hope I can be forgiven, there was this download of information, of peace, of love. The first thing that was communicated is there's nothing to forgive. Everything is in perfect divine order. And then I had what I've learned is called the life review. I began to see my life. I saw my parents' divorce and what that did to me. It made me so insecure in my self-doubt and my not enoughness. And I saw my brothers and the role they played in my life as my best friends and my heroes. And I saw things even when I'd say, oh, that was a mistake. I didn't mean to do that. And this beautiful being that held me said, there are no mistakes. What did you learn? And this beautiful being that held me said, that's your judgment of it, not ours. What have you become because of it, not in spite of it? And there was all this love. There was so much unconditional love in these arms. And no judgment. Only beauty and peace and insight, like deep wisdom. And I was told by this divine presence, this being who held me, that even felt physical the way I was held, I was told, you can be mad at God your whole life, and that would be okay. They would love me anyway. Or I was told I could be mad at myself my whole life, and that would be okay. They would love me anyway. It was nothing but love. But I was also given a third choice. And this was interesting because the being who held me, who I call God, said, I want you to have your will in this circumstance. And I'm like, my will? I was brought up in a conservative Christian home. It's your will be done, not my will be done. And this being communicated to me. God said, your will is my will. That's how much we love you. My will has always been that you have free will, and I want you to make a choice. And it was communicated to me that I could give my son back, that I could exercise my will and hand him over to God and release him and trust and let go, rather than harboring all that anger and guilt and turmoil within me. And in all that peace, and in all that love, and in all that beauty, and all that insight and wisdom, I was able to kiss my little boy, and I handed him back. I gave him over. I handed him over to God, and I let go. And then I was back in the hospital bed, back to the amputation and the colostomy bag and the braces and the wheelchair and all that went with it. But I had a little bit different insight. It had expanded everything for me. I mean, I had grown up believing that life was a test. And yet in all that love and in all that beauty, I realized that life is not a test. It was a gift. I was told life is a gift. And in every moment I have a choice of what I choose to do or how I choose to react. Even the emotions, if something makes me angry, what a gift that I can feel an emotion. But I'll tell this one last story and wrap it up. But it was time for me to go home. And my brothers came to get me, and they would literally have to lift me. They would have to lift me up and put me in the wheelchair. We drove to my brother's house where I was going to be staying for a while, where my son had been. And he was excited for me to come home, but I was so worried about how he would accept me. I mean, I'd been the rough and tumble dad, and now I was crippled and had this colostomy bag and all the things that went with it. I was never going to be the same. And I kept worrying, how is he going to deal with this? How is he going to accept me? And as we pulled up to the house, there was my son, 7 years old, looking out the window, watching as his uncles, my brothers, lifted me out of the car and into the wheelchair. And I kept thinking, how's he going to deal with this? How's he going to accept me? And I began to navigate my way. They had built a ramp for me, and they were insistent that I become independent. I had to drive that wheelchair into the house. And Spencer, my 7-year-old, came running out the door, and he came running toward me, and he ran right past me. And I thought, well, that's it. This is too much for him to see me like this and to be on his turf now. It's just too much. He's got to process this. And I continued to navigate the wheelchair and go to the ramp. And I was turning the wheelchair to go up the ramp. And I just, looked over my shoulder to see where he had gone. And then I heard him. And what he had done is he had run across the street and he was knocking on all the neighbors' doors, and he began to shout, come out, my dad has made it home, come and see my dad. And I burst into tears again, and he made the rounds hollering, and then he came and he did throw himself on my lap, which just about killed me because I still had all the sutures from the abdominal repair. And he threw his arms around my neck, and I told him, look, I'm going to work really hard to get well, but I'm going to be like this for a while. Are you going to be okay? Now, he's a grown man now. It's been 25 years, but we still laugh about what he said. He said, Dad, if you were nothing but a puddle of blood, I would still love you. And that's been true. The near-death experience has taught me that what's important is the life experience. You know, you don't have to have a horrible accident and lose half your family to realize, wow, let's make the best of today because maybe we don't get tomorrow. And life is a gift. It's not a test. And there is oneness. We are connected. We do have oneness if we choose to embrace and see each other that way rather than judging and dividing. But that's the story. That's the long and short of it. And I trust there's something in there that may have been an answer for you or may have assisted you along your way. All there is love. Even grief is love. We only grieve because we love. And lean into the love in your life. Tell the people you love that you love them. Smile at that stranger. Pitch in. Be more kind. Be more you. And simply be the highest manifestation of you there can be. Thank you.